Now let me introduce our speaker, Dr. Tamara Schwartz. She's a skilled information and cybersecurity strategist known for her game-changing collaborative approaches to drive technological, cultural, and process innovation. She's the creator of the dynamic cyber-based view of the firm, a strategic lens to evaluate globalization, advanced technology, and the intersection of information warfare, privacy, business strategy, and ethics. With over 20 years of national security experience, which you probably had a hint at with the use of the term warfare, which is not something you hear every one of our meetings, she is comfortable with the ambiguity and complexity of today's information-driven organization. Dr. Schwartz is currently an assistant professor of cybersecurity and business administration at the Graham School of Business, York College of Pennsylvania, an independent consultant and a recognized innovator. She is a member of the cybersecurity at MIT's Sloan Interdisciplinary Consortium for Improving Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity, an international think tank for cybersecurity. Her impact on the organization she served is best shown by the awards she earned as the Chief Technology Officer for the Air Force Enterprise Networking Organization, where her thought leadership informed the stand-up of Cyber Command and the design of various command centers supporting joint space, cyber, and global strategic operations, as well as the National Military Command Center. She earned the 2011 Information Operations Officer of the Year and an honorable mention of the 2011 Massachusetts Veteran of the Year. She received her Bachelor of Science in Industrial Engineering from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, her Master of Science in Engineering Management from the University of Dayton, and her Doctor of Business Administration from the Fox School of Business at Temple University. So she does have a Philadelphia connection.
Yeah.
With that, thank you very much. And please, Dr. Schwartz, if you would go ahead.
All right. Oh, actually, let's share from there. So I always start out a conversation about cybersecurity from the operational perspective. Because at the end of the day, we have these things are in front of us for a couple of very specific purposes. And so I'm going to ask you to think about why do we have these boxes? What is the purpose of them? Why do we have computers? Why do we have sensors and things hooked up to the internet? What is the purpose of that? And anyone can speak up. What do you think is the purpose of these things that we have? Why do we bother with these devices?
Time saver.
Okay, they're a time saver. How are they a time saver? Because that's what we want to dig in on. What do they help you do?
Supposedly the mundane tasks that we don't want to do.
Okay, so the way we would put that in operational terms is we use them to automate processes, right? That's why they help do some of the things that we have to do for process. So they automate process. That's one thing they do. What is something else they do?
Allow us to communicate.
They allow us to communicate, which we're doing right now. So that's the second thing. And then there's a third thing that we talk about when we talk about this.
Allow us to calculate.
Calculate, okay.
They allow us to access information easily.
There you go. They provide decision support by allowing us to access information. So the three reasons that we have these devices is to automate process, to do decision support, and to allow us to communicate. And by enabling those three things, they make a day in our lives easier. That's theoretically how it's supposed. Otherwise, what would be the purpose? There would be no reason to have these devices. And so one of the things that has happened to us in organizations is we've automated more and more processes. We've added more and more decision support because the better these, and so it becomes very organic, right? It grows around us. And before we really even pay attention, it's become part of us. And so I call this phenomenon the fact that we have been becoming cyborg. And the problem is we look in the mirror and we see a person holding a tool. And we see these things as tools that are for our use rather than as an extension of our digital selves. And when you make that mistake, when you don't think about your devices as an extension of yourself, as a creation of digital landscape to your organization, you don't always recognize how much of your organization is digital in nature. But when you think about yourself that way, you begin to think about cybersecurity as a very different construct. Now I have a little video. This is something that an artist did for me based on my dissertation. This was, and gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. So as you watch it, think about your own organization and what kinds of things you see represented in this video that you go, oh, wow, I never thought about that. So I worked with an artist on this, and we spent a long time trying to figure out how do we convey this concept of what it means to have become cyborg. Because how you do strategy when you acknowledge that you are no longer purely corporeal, right? You're no longer purely a physical construction where you can put fences up. How you do strategy changes. And part of the challenge with the way that we're doing strategy is that we design our strategies around cyber based on this idea that these are tools for our purpose. And one of the important visualizations that's in that movie is when we see the human being walking through the network administration center, and then overlaid on them is this robot, non-present presence in the network. And so we see two people. We see the person who's there in the space, and we see the person who is not physically there in the space and yet is co-located with them, doing things at the exact same instant. And that's really different. Imagine that somebody is selling you something and they go, wow, have I got a deal for you. With the incredible gizmo and the wonderful widget, you can decrease your costs. You can increase your production quantities. You can improve the quality and reduce your waste. And you can do all this thing 10 times faster than you did it last week. But, oh, by the way, and now you get that that underlying super speedy talker that goes, but anyone who wants to use this stuff can use it when they want to use it. And they can come in and they can walk in off the street and use your tools, and they can use their tools however often they want to. And if they want to use your tools that you spent money on to go make money for themselves, they can do that. And they can even use your tools to make it so you can't do your job. How many of us would raise our hand and say, ooh, I want to buy one? The problem is we buy all these things without listening to that voice. I mean, it's kind of like when you watch those medication things and they talk super fast, but if you actually pay attention to what you're saying, you go, oh my God, who would want to take this medicine? You're going to bleed out from the inside, according to what they just said in the fine print. But we don't ever look at the tools we're buying to create our organization from that perspective. We don't pay attention to the fine print, because the reality is that anything in your network is not just a tool for you. Anything in my network is not just a tool for me. These are tools for anybody who knows how to gain access to them. And so that's an important thing to understand, because it changes your strategy. It changes your strategy, because now I have to think about the fact that this is a dual use tool. It's a tool for me and a tool for anybody else who wants to and knows how to gain access to it. So that's the first piece that we need to think about. How cyborg are you? How much of your organization relies on your virtual terrain? So that's the first piece of the puzzle. The next thing that has changed is that we have a very old, skewed view of what a hacker is. The fact that we would have had the president say that the attack in 2016, the president would say that the attack on the election was some fat guy eating ramen noodles in mom's basement. That is not what hackers look like anymore. Hackers started out as people who were curious. Hackers began as people who were curious, and they would go, I wonder what would happen if I made all the computers in the computer lab across the street on that college campus go down at the same time. I wonder what would happen if I sent out a virus embedded in a Word document that automatically generated 50 new emails every time someone opened it. I wonder what would happen if. So we've gone from I wonder what would happen if to, how can I use this tool to profit? How can I use this tool to gain power? And what I want to do to gain power could be any range of things. It could be that I want to gain I want to gain economic power. I want to steal money. It could be I want to manipulate how people think. It could be I want to manipulate somebody's water supply. There are many different ways that having access to the right information can give us power. In fact, information is the most valuable commodity in the world. I love this quote. It's more valuable than money, because if you have the right information, you can make money. It's more valuable than power, because if you have the right information, you can gain power. It's more valuable than goods, because if you have the right information, you can build, acquire, or improve any good that you want. And in any business, any industry, any part of the world, the right information is absolutely priceless. I love this quote. Because what we're talking about when we talk about information warfare is we are talking about using information and information capabilities to gain competitive advantage over our rivals. Competitive advantage, right? That's what we're talking about when we talk about operations. When we look at our marketplace and we figure out how we go out into that marketplace operationally, what we want to know is how do we gain competitive advantage? And that's a very strategic thing. So if I come at cyber and I go, okay, I'm going to build my firewalls, I'm going to have my antivirus, is that going to get us competitive advantage? Think about that. Those things are necessary. But if what I want is competitive advantage, they are utterly insufficient. And in fact, they could, if they're done wrong, if they're done to the point where we create ourselves a really strong fortress and we've got a moat and there's no way to put a bridge over that moat, that actually thwarts our ability to gain competitive advantage. And that runs counter to everything that we hear when we talk about security, right? Because security is always approached from a physical perspective. How do we lock the doors? How do we keep people out? Well, the flat out reality is that everybody is in here all the time with us. And so the question then becomes not one of how do I keep people out, but in light of the fact that we know people are co-occupying our space, how do we continue to operate and function to the best of our ability? It's the difference between a fortress and wearing body armor. What does that look like for you? And so part of what you have to figure out from a strategy perspective is where does my competitive advantage come from? And how is my competitive advantage, how is it sitting on a foundation of virtual terrain? What is my virtual terrain? What are my capabilities that are all created through cyber that give me competitive advantage? That's a very different way to come at cybersecurity rather than I need to lock all the doors and lock all the windows and hope that nobody gets in. And so I often tell people that we have mischaracterized cyber threat as a technical problem, because technical problems have technical solutions. If this was a purely technical problem, we would have fixed it. But instead, what we have is a competition for strategic advantage. Do strategic advantage problems trying to gain strategic advantage, do they have a technical element? Absolutely. They definitely have a technical element. But if you come at a strategic advantage challenge with only technology, are you going to be successful? No, right? You're not. You don't go out into the marketplace and try to achieve competitive advantage over your rivals with a purely technical solution. You come at it with a whole bunch of other stuff. You come at it with a cost-based perspective to your strategy. You come at it with a marketing piece to your strategy. You come at it from a whole bunch of places, not just, you don't just take technology and throw it at your strategic advantage problem. And so if you think of cyber as a competition between you and whoever else is trying to challenge you in cyberspace, then you begin to think about, well, who are my competitors? Well, in the case of cyber, and certainly in the case of trying to avoid cyber attack, your competition are hackers. And those hackers come with as many motivations as your competitors in a marketplace do. And one of the things that I discovered when I really began to look at how cyber attack evolves over time is hackers work in a community of practice. They're not some isolated kid eating ramen noodles in mom's basement. You may have some folks that are eating ramen noodles in mom's basement, but even there, they're not isolated. They're probably collaborating with other people. One of my favorite stories is the story of Hackerville, Romania. The entire economy in this town in Romania comes from hackers who collaborate. They sit in coffee shops and work together just like any other startup. They release information out onto the web and then they go and collect information from one another. They share. They work like a community of practice. They are continuous learners. So the reason that cyber attack is constantly growing is twofold. One, you've probably all heard of Moore's Law. And Moore's Law is the speed of processing power doubles and the price comes down by half every 12 to 18 months. And that pattern has been going on since Gordon Moore made the observation in 1965. So the one piece is that the technology is on this exponential speed and increasing in capacity. And that's intersecting with people's collaborative learning behaviors. So when we talk about that, you're not talking about a risk, right? The risk of hurricanes is pretty consistent. It might be growing because of climate change, if you know, depending on where you stand on the global warming climate change issue. But hurricanes, we kind of know when hurricane season is. We kind of know what to expect based on the hurricane and where it comes on shore. That's a risk. It's a bad risk and it has severe consequences, but that's very different from, you know, hurricanes don't have, they don't have targets. They don't choose targets. They don't say, hey, we're going to go get New Orleans this year. They think they built levees that can keep us out. We're going to go prove to them those levees are crap. Right? And in fact, the hurricane that just hit, we know that the levees that were put in place actually were pretty successful. That's a risk. That's a risk that you can comprehend, you can repair for it, you can probably thwart certain aspects of whatever the risk was based on your previous experience with it. With hackers, you get the guy who says, huh, they think they built levees that can keep us out. Oh, that's so funny. Let's go show them. Let's go show them that they're wrong. So now we've gone from risk to threat. And they collaborate out on GitHub. In fact, one of the attacks we're going to talk about, a friend of mine who gets called in by all the big banks, he found the information for these attacks out on GitHub being shared. WikiLeaks is another place that you can find a lot of collaborative hacker behavior. They experiment, they do penetration testing. You know, just like you can hire someone who to come in and do what's called red team your organization, hackers, they test, they experiment, they conduct surveillance. This is a very different behavior than pure risk. And so here's lesson number 2. If you're going to come at cyber and have any chance of survival, you can't treat it the way you treat risk. You have to identify it as a threat, because how you respond to threats in the marketplace, right? It's not just a risk that your competitor might come out with a better product than you, right? That's a threat. And so how you think about that competitor is different than how you think about a hurricane. So here's 3 attacks that I think everyone should know about and understand. And the first one is the Internet of Things botnet. The Mirai Botnet is the name of the specific software. In 2016, you may remember that the East Coast got shut down pretty much by Dyn, which is a web service provider. They are the ones that keep, you know, if you're PayPal.com, they have the actual digital address mapped against the PayPal.com address. And so their servers are what facilitate network traffic happening. So the Mirai Botnet was, funnily enough, the Mirai Botnet was built by a college student who was curious. That's how it was started out. And this college student said, the college student was a Minecraft player. Now, I don't know if any of you have kids who play Minecraft or play Minecraft yourselves, but part of the Minecraft community, certainly back in 2016, maybe not as much now, but part of the business model for Minecraft is that if you host a game server, if you have a game server that will host Minecraft and you own that, you earn money. So the business model for Minecraft is that you earn money when traffic comes through your game server. And so part of the culture of the Minecraft community is that they conduct distributed denial of service attacks against one another. And so part of the Minecraft culture is that, and the business model, right? If I want to make more money, I conduct a DDoS attack against other people's game servers in order to drive Minecraft traffic to my server so that my server is earning me money. So this college student wanted to be able to make money on his Minecraft server. And so he came up with this genius bit of code that would harness together a whole bunch of devices that were hooked to the Internet of Things. So baby monitors, surveillance cameras, your router that you have for your cable television. He injected just a little bit of code onto each of these little devices, most of which were not protected because people thought, who would want to hack my baby monitor? Who would want to hack this? Who would want to hack my light bulb? And with a little bit of code on each of those devices, this software, this Mirai Botnet software, can create a DDoS attack that was operating in the petabytes of data. So you talk about a fire hose. Imagine being right at the nozzle of the fire hose. That's how fast the data. I mean, even if you get away from the tip of the fire hose, it comes out without quite as much force. It was like being right on top of the nozzle of the fire hose. And so Dyn got attacked the first time, and the way you compete against a DDoS attack is that you have your own fire hose. And if you remember the scene in, maybe you've seen or read Harry Potter, the scene where the two wands connect and the little bead of light is going back and forth between Voldemort and Harry's wands. That's how DDoS attacks and DDoS defense work against one another. It's like the connected wands with the bead of light going back and forth to see who's going to win. And Dyn was actually able to defend themselves against the first couple of attacks. Oh, but back to, sorry, I got ahead of myself. But the very first time that Mirai was used, the place it was attacking was a company in France. And the company in France, their business model was that they defended Minecraft servers against DDoS attacks. So if you want to effectively attack other people's Minecraft servers, you have to attack the company that's going to defend them. You can see that this is a very strategic idea. Now, the college student recognized that somebody, oh my gosh, what I've done might be illegal. I might have just violated the Computer Fraud, Waste, and Abuse Act. Uh-oh. And so the college student released his software into the wild. He released this Mirai Botnet software out into the wild anonymously. So go back to that community of practice concept. Somebody else went out and said, oh, this is cool. I wonder what I could do with this. Well, what they did with it was they attacked Dyn. And by doing that, they took down the East Coast, most of the internet on the East Coast in North America, and some in Europe even. The average cost of a DDoS attack, and actually this number has changed, is about $250,000 per hour. I think today we estimated around $300,000 per hour. So for every hour that internet was down, it was costing every company money. So why do I think every person should know about this Internet of Things botnet? Because think about how many sensors you have in your organization, how many devices you've hooked to the network, how many people bring devices into your network. Another one of my favorite stories about the Internet of Things is a hack that happened at a casino. The casino had decided that they didn't need Bob the fish tank cleaner anymore. They were just going to stick some sensors on the fish tank and have the fish tank automatically clean itself, which seems like a good way to cut costs, right? So what happened was and who's going to want to hack a fish tank, right? I mean, why would we even need security on a fish tank or a light bulb, right? We don't need, no one's going to hack a fish tank. No one's going to try and kill my goldfish, for crying out loud. That's absurd. So we're not going to spend money to implement security measures so that you can lock that sensor. Well, here's what happened. The casino, it did not have an open network. It had a pretty secure network. Because of course, what's the most valuable asset running through a casino? It's money, right? But guess what? That fish tank sensor rode on that network, that secure network. It had access to everything coming and going in the network because it was connected to the network. Now, the sensor was not secured. It was a completely open access sensor. So somebody came into the casino, hacked the sensor on the fish tank, and we don't know what was stolen, but we do know that petabytes of data were exported out of the casino to someplace in Norway. Well, we can surmise that it was probably money, right? So here again, the Internet of Things. Pay attention to what you are connecting to the internet. Pay attention to whether the device is secured or not secured. The way the Mirai botnet was able to, even devices that were secured, Mirai was able to tap into, because the most devices like that go on the Internet of Things, things like baby monitors and temperature control and things like that, they're secured with a standard. They come from with a standard password, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you've ever watched Spaceballs, that's the combination on an idiot's briefcase: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so Mirai was able to just, even if the device had the standard security, the standard password was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Mirai could get into it. And so essentially nothing that it tapped into was secured. So that's why this is an important one to understand. With all of the automation of process, one of the first things we do to automate operations process, one of the first things we do to monitor supply chain, is we put sensors on everything. So pay attention to the sensors and things that you put on, because this attack is predicated on the fact that most of the sensors and devices we connect to the internet are not secure. The next attack that everybody should know about: shadow brokers, 2017. Shadow brokers, if you heard about it, is when a group of Russian cyber criminals, and we'll talk about that too, they hacked the NSA. They took a bunch of exploits that were basically cyber weapons that the NSA had, and then they took them and they released them on WikiLeaks. I actually invited a friend of mine into one of my strategy classes, and he took my class out on WikiLeaks and showed him where everything was. And not only did they put all of the tools out there, they also gave you explicit instructions on how to use those tools. So this attack happened in March of 2017, and it identified a whole bunch of major vulnerabilities in Microsoft Windows. And so Microsoft immediately released a patch. For those of us who work in cybersecurity, most of us heard about the shadow brokers attack. We can't imagine that anyone in cybersecurity would not have heard about this attack. And it's stunning how many people did not know that this happened. What's even more stunning is that even though Microsoft released the vulnerability, most organizations did not patch it. Most organizations did not patch it. And so even today, there are organizations that are being hacked based on the vulnerabilities that happened back in 2017, for which there are existing patches. Because this is not something that a lot of people paid attention to. And shoot, now it's 4 years ago. We're not even talking about it anymore. Oops. So the third attack is actually, so we start with the shadow brokers in March of 2017. And there's another step that happens between the shadow brokers and the attack that's in front of you, and that's Wannacry. Wannacry happened in April of 2017. Wannacry used the exploits that were released on WikiLeaks from that NSA shadow brokers hack and incorporated them into some ransomware. Now, the Wannacry was launched by North Korea. It was stopped pretty quickly because somebody realized that what it did was it had anybody who was infected by the ransomware paid a particular website, and nobody had actually owned that domain. So somebody was able to purchase the domain for $10, and that stopped Wannacry within a couple of days of it getting launched. So now we get to the NotPetty ransomware attack. And this is where we begin to see some serious collaboration in the hacker community. Petty ransomware was actually a cybercrime capability. It was something that had monetized malware in order to get money. It did not use the things that were in the Shadow Brokers attack. Wannacry had used exploits from the Shadow Brokers attack. And so, but Wannacry had what was effectively a kill switch. That was the purchasing of the domain name to which it directed you. And so somebody, and we know it was the Russians, because the Russians were, it started in, this whole attack began in Ukraine. It was a Russian attack on Ukraine. Somebody in Russia said, okay, we're gonna make this look like it's ordinary ransomware, but it's not gonna actually be ransomware. So one of the first things that they did they took the petty ransomware so that it did all the things that petty ransomware did. It locked up all your stuff, but they removed the payment from it. So you would click on a link that said, let me pay the ransom so that I can gain access to my stuff again. But it was a dead link. It didn't take you anywhere. It didn't actually let you pay, and it didn't actually send you a decryption key, even though it looked like petty ransomware. It got into networks not only from the WikiLeaks stuff that had come from Shadow Brokers, from the NSA exploits. It also incorporated something that a French researcher had identified as a potential vulnerability, where it had to do with credentialing. And so it lumped in something that it had learned from a French researcher. It lumped in some of the stuff from the NSA attack. It lumped in some of the stuff from the NSA. And it took lessons that they had learned from when Wannacry failed and fixed the problems. And so they call it the NotPetty ransomware attack, because petty ransomware is a very specific criminal hack that has to do with raising money. This was not, the purpose of this was not to get money. The purpose of this was to thwart operations. And so why is this important to know about? Well, because this is where you can begin to understand the impact to operations. Maersk, there's a really great article. You want to read a really great article about how this unfolded at Maersk. And I think since many of you are probably in supply chain, you'll find it very interesting. There's an article by a man named Andy Greenberg in Wired magazine in 2018. And it talks all about the petty attack, the NotPetty attack, and how Maersk was affected by it. But essentially, they had no insight into their operations for 5 days. They lost all their in-transit visibility of cargo for over a week. They had 17 of their global ports completely shut down. They couldn't load and unload cargo at all over the place. So I believe in Philadelphia's port that there was a backup that was miles and miles long. Now, how do you begin to quantify this? Well, Maersk came up with a quantification of about 300 million is what they quote. But what's the value of lost business? What's the value of all of those people who were in line with refrigerator trucks who couldn't unload their trucks into refrigeration facilities? There's a whole bunch of costs that have never been accounted for, because when you look at the butterfly effect, right, the cascade through the chain, it's very hard to wrap your head around. But this was the first time, and Merck Pharmaceuticals was shut down for 6 months. Merck Pharmaceuticals, I think they quote somewhere around 600 million for this attack. Mondelez is the Oreo cookies and some other, Nabisco, some other things. Cadbury cream eggs, if you like those at Easter time. Mondelez, I think, quotes about $100 million. Mondelez actually tried to sue their insurance company they made a claim, and their insurance company refused to pay the claim. The reason their company refused to pay the claim was that this was oh, what's the word? I can't, I'm blanking on the word, but it was collateral damage. It was collateral damage from a nation state attack, an act of war of Russia on Ukraine. And insurance, as you may or may not know, has exclusion, all kinds, there's always exclusions in your insurance, right? I mean, there's a million exclusions. One of those is acts of war. And so if you are collateral damage in an act of war, your insurance company does not cover it. So again, this comes back to physical versus virtual terrain. Nobody expected a Danish company with operations all over the world to be victimized as collateral damage by an attack of Russia on Ukraine. And if it had been a bomb, they probably would not have been. And the only reason that Maersk was affected for such a short period of time, they were really only affected for about a week. It was sheer luck. It turned out that there was a power outage in Ghana, Africa, on the African continent in Ghana, that just happened to coincide with when the ransomware hit. And before they could connect that single server, and so what was on that single server in Ghana, it was part of a network of servers that managed the entire Maersk virtual terrain. That server said who could connect to who, what could connect where all the nodes were on their network. And so they had that data backed up, and they believed that they had a good solid strategy for containing that information. They never anticipated a threat that could hit every server simultaneously. And so fortunately, the power outage kept this server from being shut down. The server was offline, and so they discovered it, and then they tried to transmit the data, and they couldn't because the network could not support. It kept recycling, and so eventually they wound up having to hand carry the server. They couldn't find anybody with visas. It's a great story. I highly recommend reading Greenberg's article, or I think he has a book even that goes into even greater detail. But the important thing to pay attention to here is that this was the first time we really began to understand there are huge operational impacts that way exceed what we can think of. And this is one of the challenges that we face, right? When we're trying to justify an expense in a company, we're always looking at return on investment. And one of the really challenging things about strategy and investing and getting people to understand why you would want to invest in cyber is trying to quantify that return on investment. It's very easy to do that when it's, here's what our cost savings will be. Here's what our increased production rates will be. But with cyber, it's a little bit more difficult. However, when you begin to look at how your organization creates their competitive advantage and how that is undergirded by cyber capabilities, you can begin to create that ROI for people to understand that. And at the World Economic Forum, the chairman of Maersk said, I finally get it. This is not about risk mitigation. It is about competitive strategic advantage. And he said that at the World Economic Forum in January of 2018. So what is your strategic advantage impacts? There's financial impacts. We can actually quantify what the average cost of some of these attacks are. There's operational impacts. We can actually identify how it thwarts our ability to execute. And there's reputational damage. Can you or can you not get the job done when you are under attack? So how do you go about beginning to develop a strategy, right? That's what we want to know. That's why we're all here. And so what I talk about is how do you begin to build a cyber-based perspective of your operations? Because when you begin to, and you need all of these things. I talk about cybersecurity being a tactical behavior, and there are definitely tactical things we have to do, right? In order to ensure our ability to operate, there are tactical things that we have to do. Then we get to an operational perspective. That's where we get into this concept. We've heard the change from cybersecurity to cyber defense. And when we do cyber defense, we begin to prioritize which assets we want to protect, which data is more crucial than others. So that's getting into an operational level. To get into the strategic level, I call it adaptive cyber. I talk about this concept of, if you think about a midfielder on a soccer team, The midfielder plays both offense and defense. They go to the ball wherever it is, and their job is to do both. And so what we need, where we need to be, we do all this tactical stuff. That's important. We need to begin to think operationally, what things are important, how do we collaborate, what are the relationships going on? But really where we want to get is how do we constantly be changing and adapting our strategy in this environment so that we can continue to function, we can continue to execute regardless of what's going on. How are we doing for time? I'm looking at the time. It looks like it's almost 7. Is this a 1 hour or?
Hour and a
We're
half.
not till 8.
Hour and a half. Okay, good. All
Yeah.
right. I just wanted to make sure I was going at the right tempo. So here are some things that when I talk about dynamic adaptive cyber, it's about being able to do a lot of these different things. You need to be able to characterize your environment. You need to understand what is your operational environment. You need to understand who else is out there. Who else is out there in your operational environment? It's no different than when you go to market, right? A go to market strategy. You want to identify who your rivals are, and you want to figure out how you achieve advantage over them. And how are you going to deter them? How are you going to thwart their ability to achieve advantage over you? So you want to characterize your environment, and you want to know who is out there competing with you. And then you want to start to do things to shape your environment, right? How am I going to shape the competitive environment? What am I going to do? What things am I going to put out there? And so this begins to get into what are some of the communication strategies I want to have? What are some of the decisions I want to be able to make? What things do I want to automate? What things might I not want to automate? How do I shape that environment so that I am deterring my rivals, thwarting their ability to damage my ability to execute? And then you want to, while you're doing all that, you want to be operating and competing. And so you have to be doing all of these things simultaneously. So how do you do that? Well, you have to start with understanding what you look like, understanding the environment you're operating in. And again, this goes back to that, we all look at ourselves and we think, oh, look, I'm Tammy Schwartz and I'm holding a phone in my hand. But there's a complete version of Tammy Schwartz that resides inside this invisible place. And it isn't just me who creates it. I mean, I can completely not use social media, and there's still a digital presence because my medical companies, my medical capabilities that are out there, they collect data on me. My bank collects data on me. My employer collects data on me. The places I shop, I could be completely, trying to unplug, and there would still be a virtual representation of who I am. And that's something we forget. Oh, I'm off grid. Nobody has any data on me. Really? unless you're Grizzly Adams living in the woods, or the Unabomber, chances are somebody is collecting data on you. And even nowadays with the Google Earth, even now that is beginning to make it harder for even Grizzly Adams to go off the grid. So pay attention to the fact that even if you think you don't have a virtual presence, you probably do, because everyone else is collecting on you all the time. So there's 3 dimensions to this construct of understanding yourself. There's a physical dimension, there's an informational dimension, and there's a cognitive dimension. And they're not isolated from one another. They're working in that. There's constant feedback going across 2 dimensions or across all 3 simultaneously. They're all working together. So how do you begin to think about what does your physical dimension look like? Well, factors in your organization. So again, this goes to culture, this goes to policies, practices, all kinds of things. What factors influence the physical dimension? What is your bring your own device policy at work? How much of your operations do you connect to the Internet of Things with various sensors? How often do you introduce new technology? How often do you pay attention to what technology is out there? I think one of the interesting things I discovered was that let's say you have a facility that you've done what's called air gap it. You said, oh, this is so important, I am not going to connect it to the network. But even not connected to the network, it still has some computers that are making it operate. Apparently, some researcher said, I wonder if, right, because that's what researchers do. We like to, we get curious and we go, I wonder if I could do this. Well, some researcher discovered that they could use a security camera. So you've got this very important thing, you've air gapped it, it's not connected to any networks. And now you've surrounded it with security cameras so you can keep an eye on it to make sure no one gets to it and comes in and plugs things in, because we all know from Stuxnet and the attack on the Iranian nuclear facility that somebody could wind up coming and plugging something in. So we've got security cameras to make sure nobody physically goes in and plugs anything in. Well, somebody discovered that if those cameras have infrared technology, you can actually jump software through the infrared beam from the security camera into the air-gapped facility. Oh my gosh, what's the point of the security camera? I would be more secure without security cameras. That doesn't compute. And so this is the kind of stuff you have to be engaged in continuous learning about whatever you've got in your physical infrastructure. You have to really know what is in your physical infrastructure. You need to know who's bringing stuff in. You need to know what the default passwords are so you can change them. If things don't come with passwords and security, you need to think about what are they connected to that would make them an interesting domino to push on to bring down your design. What is the levels of physical? You'd have to pay attention to all of this stuff in the physical dimension. And not just all of this stuff, but what am I doing in the physical dimension, right? I'm moving stuff from point A to point B in a supply chain role. I am manufacturing something with a robot machine. What is it that I am doing from a physical, production capability? What is it that I do? What are my competitive advantages that are physical in nature? Okay, so those are the kinds of things that you think about. So there's a lot of kinds of questions you can ask. Here's some examples. Do you let anybody come and connect their personal devices to your networks? What critical operational and business assets do you have connected? What kinds of devices and sensors do you have in there? What is it you do? So think about your physical dimension. The informational dimension, we have all kinds of information in organizations. We have some that's super secret, that's very private because it's our competitive advantage information, so we don't let anyone have access to it. Then we have some information that we share with certain people. So we might have contractual data that we share with partners in a vertically linked organization where we have different parts of the value chain reside at different organizations. And then we have public data. That's the data we stick out on the internet for everybody to see. And then we have data that's moving from one level to another. And so how much this is automated, where we store our data, what kinds of process automation we've got in there, the data that runs the process, paying attention to these kinds of factors, how you've got one type of data co-located with another type of data. I once read an article about a water purification facility where their billing data and the software that automated the water purification process were co-located on the same box. And because that information was co-located, somebody went in trying to steal billing data because they were going to do identity theft and maybe credit card fraud. And they discovered they could actually manipulate the water supply. Why would you want to pay attention to that? Because if you pay attention to that and you start thinking, what is more important, billing or water purification? And if you put them on separate boxes, you can make one a different kind of target than the other. You can make them different kinds of targets. And so paying attention to how the physical devices are containing the informational piece. I know this is probably making everyone's head explode. So what kinds of questions do you begin to ask? Well, which data is really, really important? How does it related to our physical assets? How is it related to services that we provide? Where is, what is the enterprise architecture, and where do we have, looking at the whole thing, where that's the where do our data and software reside? Do we have things that shouldn't be co-located on a single box so that we've got a single point of failure? Do we, what things can we not live without in decision making? How do we prioritize which processes are critical to our strategic advantage versus something else? Because the reality is, at the end of the day, we're talking about a sieve. So we know there's going to be people in there monkeying around with our stuff. We just know it. And so what do we need in order to keep functioning while we are under attack? And this is so foreign to us as civilians, because in the past we used to say, the military or the police will protect us from people coming in here and hurting us. But they can't come in and hurt us from the inside. We have someone we can call, but we don't. So we have to think about, and this is what the military does. This is, military, we always talk about, how do we operate in a compromised environment? We know that they're going to be shooting at us. We know which direction they're going to be shooting at us from. What do we need to wear in order to reduce the impact of being shot at? That's the mindset that we're talking about having to get into. And because so many of our targets in the country rely in the hands of private firms, private organizations, the government isn't even allowed to defend it for us. And so that's why it requires this very different mindset change. And the last piece, and this is a piece that we often don't think about, the cognitive dimension of cyberspace. I find this to be the most important part. This is when you go from tactical and operational to strategic. Because when you just think about the physical devices, that's a very tactical approach. When you begin to think about how the physical devices and the information work together, you're getting a little bit more operational. That's sort of that cyber defense piece. But you're still not at the strategic level because you haven't jumped to here yet. Thinking about who, how. This cognitive dimension is so exploitable. It's about the relationships we have between our company and another company. It's about who are our key decision makers in the organization. Who do we trust? Because if I want to really mess you up, all I have to do is present myself as somebody that you trust, give you information to manipulate how you make a decision, and then you make the decision. I never even had to shut down your network. All I had to do was come in and pose as someone you trust, someone whose word you make decisions based on. And so when you forget this cognitive dimension, when you don't think about why would someone want to come in, what kind of people would want to come in, what would their goal be when they come in, right? The reason that the Russians come into Maersk is very different from the reason some cyber criminal comes in, right? The cyber criminal comes in with ransomware, they want money. The Russians come in with ransomware, they want to completely thwart your ability to operate and shut down your entire supply chain. So thinking about who it is, but from a competitive advantage perspective, who in your organization do you really rely on? How are your decision-making processes automated? And good grief, how are you engaging in continuous learning? How are you making sure that you know when new exciting methods of attack are getting out there in the public sphere? Because the hackers are all collaborating. So if you're not collaborating, if you're not paying attention to what the hackers are collaborating about, you're gonna lose. We are gonna lose if we don't behave the way they behave. This need to be continuous learners is huge. It's absolutely critical. And so here's some questions you can begin to ask about your organization to begin to identify what the cognitive parts of your competitive advantage are. You know, things like, who are your key personnel? What kinds of decisions are parts of your key business processes, and how does that link to certain people? What knowledge assets do you have in the firm that that are absolutely critical to your competitive advantage? All these these are some of the kinds of questions that you can ask. So I was thinking that this might be a good place for breakout groups. If for no other reason than to give you a break from listening to me. But these questions, maybe think about what do your 3 dimensions look like in your organization? What are some of the things that you need to think about? What are some of the things that you've thought about since I started talking, I guess? So maybe this is kind of where I was thinking breakout sessions, Bob. All right, so before I go back to, I think I only have 2 or 3 slides left. So I was talking with Bob and Scott, I think, right? Yeah. Bob mentioned something about looking at who might be interested in buying. He's an investment banker, and looking at mergers and acquisitions and collecting information. And he said, you know, we're interested in what buyers might be interested in a specific target. So if I were trying to build a cognitive dimension, I would dig down on that. I would look at, okay, here's the people who might want to buy. Who are the people who might want to thwart those folks from being successful? Maybe they're all in competition with one another. Maybe there is some outside actor who just doesn't want them to be successful. They're not actually interested in buying this thing themselves, but they don't want this company to buy whatever it is. In the case of Scott's in the electric power world, and we started talking about the fact that do you work in electric power distribution, or do you help organizations that do that, Scott? That was not what I was unclear entirely about what you do.
Yeah, we help organizations that do that.
Okay. So if I'm thinking about electric power distribution, what are the things that need to be hardened? For example, there's a couple of attacks. And again, one of the things that you can do if you want to stay on top and learn constantly, pay attention to what Russia is doing in Ukraine. If you want to know what is coming down the pike, watch what Russia is doing in Ukraine. Find as much information about that as you possibly can. For the electric power industry, the 2 attacks that we know of that were cyber-based that did in fact turn off the lights were Russia attacking Ukraine in 2015 and 2016. I can't remember the name of the first one, but the second one was called Indestroyer. And the first time it involved hackers going in and taking control of an operator's operational terminal. The second time, the whole learning thing, right? I mentioned the continuous learning thing. They had taken the software and automated some of it in order to, can you hear me okay? I think my AirPods are dying. Hear me okay? All right.
Yes.
Yes.
The second time they automated the software so that one hacker, before it was a 1-to-1, so a hacker had to take control of a person's operational terminal. But in the second version, a year later, the software could actually take control. One hacker could take control of about 15 terminals. So you had an extension capability of one to 15. And then the other piece was that the software could be tailored. You could tailor the software based on the type of electric power infrastructure. And so that's just another example of why you want to pay attention to what's going on out there so that you can begin to, if you were prepared for the first one, which was when somebody comes and hangs out in your terminal and controls your terminal. And now this new threat, the threat is constantly changing. And so learning where it is you want to look to educate yourself and stay on top of what's going on is really, really important. What were some of the conversations that you had when you started thinking about this? I'm guessing that this is not easy. I've never experimented with this in an organization. I've done it a little bit like looking at what does the college look like? What does a cyber-based view of a college look like? But I don't know how to go about doing this. I have some knowledge because of when we tried to build inside when we were building this space, when we were looking at building a space operations center, we were asked to, the team when I was on active duty, we were asked by the commander of Joint Space Command to come into a facility where they had 4 different units that flew 4 different kinds of satellites. So one flew GPS, one flew Discus, one flew, I don't know what the other, Nilstar, I think was another one. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to break that down so that because what the Air Force did, or still does, is they train the satellite operators to the specific satellite. And the vision was, could we have one organization, one operations center that flew all the satellites, and this section was responsible for maintenance. And this section was responsible for looking at how we operationally use the satellite to support forces on the ground. And this one, this organization over here did training to make sure that various members could be in different parts. And so that was a massive mindset shift. And so we actually went out to where these satellites were all operated. And we, part of my team, not me, but they crawled through, they actually found the cables and they crawled through where the cables ran because they were trying to identify which ground stations were connected to which other devices and where the data came out and which monitors were connected to which ground stations. And they actually traced all they physically traced where everything was. And then they started thinking about, okay, what information is in this part of the structure? What information is in that part of the structure? We've moved into this cloud-based environment. It's very hard to know that. And so there's a lot. So now we're talking about a relationship between you and your cloud provider. That's a cognitive element, your relationships between your organization and some other organization. I don't know how to do this. What kind of conversations did you guys have in your breakout session? Does anyone want to share?
Well, in our group, we were all one-off kind of, we didn't really have organizations that we were inside of to talk about. So we discussed what we did in our own personal setups for our own house networks, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, we were away from the organizations long enough that we weren't really tied to any at the moment.
So the important thing is to don't think about cybersecurity when you're doing this. Think about your operations. What decisions do you make that give you competitive advantage? What relationships do you have that give you competitive advantage? Because if I want to attack you, that's what I'm going to look at. I'm going to look for targets within your organization, within your maybe you're an independent consultant. And I discovered that you are an independent consultant, but you're working with Maersk. And so I say, aha, Tim is way more vulnerable target than Maersk, especially because Maersk, I've read all about how much they've changed their behaviors, but they trust Tim. And so I'm going to start by attacking Tim, and I'm going to impersonate Tim. And so I'm going to send emails from Tim's account. And now Maersk, I know, is going to open them because they trust him. So that's what I mean when I start when I say start thinking about take a cyber-based perspective, look at yourself as you are. You know, how much of an electronic storefront do I have? How much of my in-transit visibility into my supply chain is based on some sort of RFID being read by some sort of RFID reader that tells me what stuff went onto what box and where is that information coming from? And that's not about cybersecurity. That's about, okay, part of the reason that people come and go to me, it's because I can tell them instantaneously where their package is in the shipping process. I can tell them instantaneously when what's going on in the market right now, and we've got this high-speed trading software that will allow that trade that they want to be made to happen instantaneously. So these are the kind, and that is what gives you, so think about what it is that gives you your competitive advantage and how that is supported virtually. What is it in cyber, in some sort of cyber capability that supports your operations, because that's the first step, right? You can't figure out what to take care of if you don't know what you really look like, right? If I'm not getting my blood pressure taken and going to the doctor for a checkup, I might not know that I need to, have a low sodium diet. But now I understand that, I have, the indicators that I could become type 2 diabetic. So I can change my diet in order to thwart the ability of diabetes to take control, or at least I can delay the onset of it. But if you don't actually have the situational awareness of how your day-to-day functionality is supported, you can't then make good strategic decisions about where, okay, I have $1,000. Where am I going to use that $1,000? Where am I going to get the most bang for my buck? I might just go, oh, I'm going to spend $1,000 on a firewall, and a firewall isn't going to do me any good. But I could spend that $1,000 in having sensors that are actually secure sensors versus open sensors. And that makes a much bigger impact on my infrastructure than that firewall ever would have. And oh, by the way, those sensors are what keep my operations functioning really quickly. And that's where my competitive advantage comes in. And so it's not an obvious change, because we're so busy hearing what's coming out of the cybersecurity world, and bigger locks, stronger locks, fast, don't get caught by a phishing message, etc. So some of the things that you can do in continuous learning, there's a lot of places to do that. Here's some examples of questions that my friend Jean and I came up with. Jean has probably fixed some bank that you bank at, or fixed some healthcare organization that your health data was compromised at. He's at the top of a very short list of people in the country and even in the world who get called when there's things going on. But what resources are we using to maintain our knowledge and awareness of the latest attack vectors and hacker exploits? This again goes to pay attention to what Russia's doing in Ukraine. That's one source that you want to tap into. What open source software security communities are we participating in? So you may be participating in OWASP. They usually tell you, they keep a running list of the top 10 vulnerabilities, and that's one place you can go to find out what's going on. What are the vulnerabilities that you should know about, and where are the fixes for those vulnerabilities? If you have not, I can't imagine that you haven't patched this, but if you haven't, you definitely should. And according to Jean, Eternal Blue is the vulnerability that was exploited. It was stolen by the shadow brokers and exploited in both the Wannacry and the NotPetty. Shockingly, even though all that stuff happened in 2017, even though it was all very public in the news, there are still people today who have not patched it. And the software, it's been getting more and more sophisticated how to use it. It's out there on GitHub being shared how to do that. So if you have not patched this, or you find out if you have, because this is huge, and it's still being exploited today. So that I think my other AirPod just died. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I think I have to switch to my. Oh no, there's that. It says they're still working. They were making that funny noise. So questions.
Elder, do we have any?
Not at the moment. Just they're all looking good. It was a great overview.
A question I have. Are
Sure.
you suggesting, Dr. Schwartz, that the first thing you probably should look at from a strategic defense perspective is the area that would cause you the most? If you lost it, it would be the most painful, I guess, correct?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. If this went down, we would not be able to do business. Okay, so this is the capability that if we can't do this, we can't do business. Oh my goodness, what does this on?
1 second.
Turning off my Bluetooth because my AirPods are dying and my computer's going back and forth for the microphone. Yeah, so the key is beginning to understand what it is that you have. And
So for the manufacturing people, it would almost be looking at theory of constraints in a backwards sense. What constraint would wreak the most havoc?
Mm-hmm. Critical
because
path.
rest assured, whoever wants to attack your operations is looking at that. They're going, aha, if I move this one switch from A to B, their entire supply chain can't function, or their entire manufacturing operation can't function. It could be and it's probably something really,
Tiny.
like the fish tank sensor, right?
Mhm.
Who would have ever thought you could steal millions of dollars through a fish tank? Not the people who automated the fish tank, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
You see some questions down here in the chat.
We've got one there. How would you recommend it to be prioritized, the cybersecurity?
Yeah, so
Okay.
how do you prioritize your most critical operations?
And how much money is it worth, right?
And how much can you afford to lose? And the reality is that you cannot come up with, that $1,000. Where you spend it is really hard to figure out. And certainly if you're coming at it from a risk mitigation perspective versus what is it that allows me to function? If I lost these 6 things, I could still make money. But if I lost this one thing, I would be dead in the water. Figuring out what that one thing is, that's what you want to spend your money on. But what happens is, because we've all been coached, you got to plug every hole. Well, you're not going to plug every hole. It's a freaking sieve. You only have 10 fingers. So you have to figure out where's the hole that matters. And that's hard. And it's different for every organization. It's even different for every part of every organization. And that's what makes this so hard, right? I mean, this is, I use the word when I talk with my students, I talk about VUCA all the time. VUCA is another military acronym. It stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. The world is VUCA, and it's always been VUCA, but it's more so now because we've become so much smaller through our transportation and our technology networks. Globalization has made VUCA that much more painful. And we as human beings, we don't like complexity. We like simple. And the complexity is just expanding exponentially. And every time we add another node on the network, every time we add another sensor, every time we collect another element of data, we expand that complexity. But we still want to see things as simple. And that's the problem. If you think about, you drop a pebble in the pond, you can see the ripples, right? You drop 2 pebbles in the pond, the ripples are going to bang into one another. You get a rainstorm, you can't figure out what all the connections are. It's very hard, and it makes our heads hurt. And so what we have to figure out is where are those rocks gonna impact us the most? And that's what when I talk about trying to take a cyber-based perspective, you have to start at why you have this junk on your desk in the first place. It is there because it's supposed to make a day in your life easier. And then you work backwards. How is this making my life easier? Okay, well, then I know which things are the most important. And that's how you begin to prioritize. That's how you begin to understand where to invest. The challenge with, there's a line of research called salience, and that's a very salient point, right? This is why we buy lottery tickets. And this is part of why it's so hard to get people to understand how to invest. When we look at buying a lottery ticket, what we do is we value loss. And wherever the loss is going to be the most painful, that's where we prioritize. So the gain, you have to gain 3 times or 10 times as much for it to outweigh whatever the loss is. So why do we buy a lottery ticket? Because we know that the $10 we spend on the lottery ticket, we're probably going to lose, right? It's a guaranteed loss of $10 in terms of probability. Much higher probability that you lose the $10. But the loss we focus on is the mega millions. We don't look at, I still have $10. We look at, I don't have mega millions. And that's why we go buy a lottery ticket. So from an investment perspective, in risk, right, in cybersecurity, we've got the opposite. I know I'm going to lose $1,000 if I buy this security capability. But if I don't spend this $1,000 on this security capability, I know I get to have $1,000. We don't say, oh my goodness, if I don't spend this, because Maersk, the thing that's really crazy about what happened at Maersk, the reason that they got hacked, it was 2017, this event happened, right? 2017. They were still running servers that operated on Windows 2000. Servers that were not even supported by Microsoft anymore. They had not updated all of that stuff because it cost $1,000 or it cost $1 million or whatever it cost. And they said, that's not a loss I'm willing to accept. I want to keep the $1 million. And so they did not perceive the correct loss. And that's one of the challenges is where do I expend my money? And so understanding that, I see Scott typed in there something. I think you don't have my chat box open.
I just said that's probably the most difficult yet important discussion to have with a CFO.
And that's why I come at this from an operational perspective, because it's, people that are buying more tech, it's easy for them to come in and quantify an ROI for the CEO and the CFO and say, hey, look, if we spend $1,000 on this gizmo, man, we're going to be able to do everything awesome. And the ROI is 6 months and it's going to be this much money and blah, 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 blah. After 6 months, we're going to be raking in millions. Somebody tries to come in and says to the CFO, well, we need to spend this $1,000 so that, how do you quantify the absence of a loss? That's the hard part. But because of some of the things that happened with Maersk and Merck, you come out at operation. What would it cost us to have, the answer to the CFO, what would it cost us to lose in-transit visibility for a week, an hour, a month? What would it cost us to lose the ability to manufacture lug nuts for 6 hours? Yeah, that's the kind, and when you begin to come at it that way, then you can begin to justify for the CFO why I want to spend $1,000 on this seemingly innocuous thing that doesn't seem to give me any payback. But if you don't talk to people in the C-suite with operations at the center of the conversation, you cannot get the investment. You just can't. Just go take more fishing training. That's not going to get it done. We have to assume there's some knucklehead who's going to click. Now that the knucklehead has clicked, what is it that we need to make sure doesn't get affected? Right? It's inevitable that somebody's going to click. So, yeah, quantifying it operationally is really important.
Beacon is the premier executive networking organization serving the Mid-Atlantic region. To learn more, go to beaconforlife.org.